If you've ever wondered what it takes to write a textbook, then this interview is going to be for you. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Hannah Reynolds. She is the co author of The Power of Her, a textbook that's going to be examining the influence of women shaping politics and society. Today, I'm interviewing the other co author, Dr. Sandra Pavelka, who is the professor and founding director of the Institute of Youth and Justice Studies. We talk about the very in depth research process and writing process for this textbook, how it came to be, and some of her favorite case studies that she studied so far. Before we dive into the interview, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more interviews from Screens and Statutes. And as always, thanks for watching. Welcome to Screens and Statutes. My name is Kimber Marie. I'm excited to be talking with Dr. Sandra Pavelka today about the book, The Power of Her. This is like a part two. I got to speak with your co-author, Hannah, not too long ago. And so I'm excited to be talking with you today, Dr. P. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I'm very excited for this part two. And just to dive right in, I would love to know how The Power of Her came to be, just the ideation process. I know Hannah had mentioned there was like a gap in the academic literature that you saw. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. So actually, just to kind of go back about a year, well, maybe a year and a half ago, I had been courted by Kendall Hunt Publishing, and they really were interested in me coming on board to write a book. And at the time, I was completing another book, and I thought, wow, this is a lot. Let me step back. And so I spoke with her, with our contact a little bit more. So I said, well, let me finish that book, which was actually September of 2024, and then kind of move forward. So we came back together, and at the time, actually last fall, and I think Hannah actually took my class when she was at FGCU. I was teaching women in politics and society, which I teach kind of on a regular basis. And so we we're going through different topics of what I could write on, because my area, really what I'm known for internationally, is restorative justice and youth policy and law. And although I teach in political science, went through some like juvenile justice topics and some other topics. And I said, look, one of the main things that we're looking at, especially in the class I teach in women in politics, is a more kind of United States, state-centric book that talks about the different dynamics of women in government and politics and women in society, and really going through kind of women in the executive branch and legislative branch and judiciary. One book that I had used was really kind of, well, I don't know, the author hadn't really updated in a number of years. And then the book I had last year, it was more internationally focused. So I really wanted a more state-centric book, and then to also talk more about theory and include a chapter about that. So I had a clear vision on what I wanted a little bit of international, but not, kind of the main focus of the book being international. And Kendall Hunt just loved the idea. There was really nothing like that out there. So by December, I had signed another book contract, which I probably need to go
Nice.
get some psychiatric help about that. But that's a whole other topic for no whole nother day. But then it was I had been talking with Kendall Hunt about that, and I thought, gosh, this is another large undertaking for me. And I was actually sitting on my lanai one Sunday morning talking with Hannah, and Hannah said, well, I'll help you with the book, whatever you need, if you need research, what have you. And I said, well, just without hesitation, I asked her if she would be interested in co-authoring, and she said, oh my gosh, yes, absolutely. Because for me, as not only a woman but also a professor, mentorship is so important. And Hannah, as you know, you've interviewed her. She's a dynamic, just intelligent, amazing young woman. And I know her research skills are really well, and I know how bright she is. And I just thought she would be a great, addition to the book. We brought her on board, and we just submitted all the chapters last week, and we're doing
Nice.
final review and editing of the book. And so I'm super excited.
And I'd love to kind of get more granular on like what the process is for writing a textbook. It's not every day that you talk to a textbook author. So maybe you can give like a kind of like a timeline of what that's been like and how you conduct your research.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because each publisher is different. This publisher is a lot different from other publishers I've had. We've had to have submit a chapter a month. We've actually, in some cases, submitted 2 chapters a month just because we're overachievers and that's what we did. But you really need, obviously, to have a very supportive publisher, but to have a really great vision and a vision of what you want to do. Certainly, exemplary co-author, which I'm very blessed to have, and be task oriented. So you have deadlines. Like for example, with Kendall Hunt, we have monthly deadlines that we're actually ahead of schedule on since we submitted the entire, all 12 chapters. But to have that vision, to be task oriented, to have it, be able to work on it and really focus, because that's really hard to do, right? You have to be focused and just you have your everyday life and things that are going on, and then of course your work. But then to actually sit down and research and write, and you know, it's a lot easier now, of course, because we have the internet. But and there's so much on so many resources on libraries and so forth. But to really sit down and focus is, I think, probably the number one challenge. Everything else kind of falls into place.
And that a quick follow-up question on that, because especially like with the internet and there being so much information and so many case studies of, women who are setting examples in like the political space or journalism, what is your process for also kind of not cutting through the noise, but like narrowing in on those case studies that you want to learn more about or the research that you want to pull from? Maybe you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting because we actually have a chapter. There's a legislative chapter and a judicial chapter that was so lengthy that we have to go back and really kind of edit down and cut down a bit because there's just so much. And you don't want to exclude some really important points, but you also know that you can't have a book chapter that's like 50 pages, which we ended up doing, cutting it several times, which we're going to cut it again. But you really have to kind of hone in and decide what's more important than what's kind of at the top of your list in terms of importance. Not that there's anything that's not important, but the degree, the priority in the details. And that can be really challenging, but obviously you can accomplish it. And that's something we've had to do with this work because I mean, the the number of women, the caliber of women that we've researched and along the way and included in our book is just incredible. And I'm just so proud to be a woman knowing what women before me have done. And of course, we're still evolving, we're still moving forward. So yeah, it's been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, and of the women, you've studied so far, what have been, maybe you have like a top favorite, or maybe there's a couple that come to mind that have been your favorite to study?
Well, that's a really great question because along and just in teaching women in politics and also just in general teaching general kind of government, the suffragists have always been just an incredible force to me. And so with this book, I've researched a lot more on them, and we have a good amount in the suffrage chapter on our suffragists. And if you go back to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who started the Seneca Falls Convention and wrote the Declaration of Sentiments going back in time, 1848. She was really kind of the first to bring this up. But then Susan B. Anthony led the charge, and she kind of led the way, and was the first kind of woman to really lay the groundwork for suffrage in this country. Well, it took about 100 years, I mean, obviously until 1920 for this to happen, for us to actually get it in the US Constitution as the 19th Amendment. And then and Dr. Alice Paul, who was actually one of the most incredible suffragists who kind of picked up the next level from after Susan B. Anthony passed away. Paul was really the one to bring it up a notch. I mean, she was persecuted and prosecuted and arrested, and so was Anthony and her right. And they kept moving forward, and we're talking a bunch of about these women. This is a while ago, right? And for these
Yeah.
women, 100 years ago. So imagine what these women went through
Mm,
for us to have the right to vote.
yeah.
Just an incredible story. And I think of all the women I've studied, not to discount any of them because they're all amazing, but the suffragists really, in my mind, just take all the glory because they deserve it for sure.
Yeah. It's really crazy because I know it's easy to think like, "Oh, that was so long ago," but then in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that long ago,
Mm,
and it's
it really
just
wasn't.
it's wild to think, that the rights that we have now, like, even just, like, I think in the late wasn't it the late, 1970s or 80s? You'll probably be able to correct me on this, but, like, when women were able to get credit cards on their own and, all these things that I know I take for granted, every day, it wasn't that long ago that
No,
we didn't have that, and so it's really
exactly.
mind-blowing to think.
A woman could not buy a piece of property. We could not be
Right.
even be landowners at one point, you know?
Yeah.
We couldn't have our own credit card, I mean, or bank account, and it was to think that is
Wild.
just it is, and
Yeah.
here we are because we're very blessed. You think about it, all
Mhm.
that we have, but at one point we didn't, and we really have to give credit to those women before us who, really worked for us, and I might also add, it wasn't just women because there Black males also kind of stepped up for suffragists because they knew what it was like not to have rights, and they really stepped forward to help women back in the late 1800s, early 1900s to gain the right to vote.
And so now that you submitted your chapters, like what comes next? Like what's the next process and what impact do you hope that this will have?
Goodness. Well, now we're editing, we're reviewing, and kind of like I said, there were a couple chapters that we really need to reduce a little bit. But so that's our next step. That's what we're working on now. And we also have to work on just finishing it up. And it's just now, I mean, we went from this kind of one major task to now another. It's just a different. It's not as tedious, it's just a different. So as we move forward with that in the next 2 months or more, we'll be finishing it up. And then I think, in terms of my hope for this book, it goes beyond just women. Obviously, I think it's going to have a huge impact on women in general. Obviously, my students, it's more, you know, s- it's but anyone could pick it up and read it because that's how we wrote it. That's what we wanted to do is make sure that, anyone could really pick it up. But I think the impact primarily will be on women, but again, the general population can read it and really see women's impact and how they were resilient and how they are really incredible people to have at the table making decisions and what an impact that I shouldn't say they, but we have had.
Well, I know I'm looking forward to having a copy because
Well, make sure you
I
get a copy.
because I love so anytime I like get my sights set on a new topic or just like an area that I feel like I should know more about, and this is
Mhm.
definitely one of those areas, I think one of the best things to do is find a textbook that just really, you know, gets you even more curious about it and can set it up in a way that the flow of the information makes sense. And it sounds like that's
Absolutely.
exactly what y'all are doing. So it'll be exciting to read through that. I would be really interested in hearing, from your studies, research, and work experience, what is one piece of advice you'd give to female professionals or maybe even some of your students?
Well, uh, I have so much advice to give because I've lived it all. I think what I'd like to do now is read a quote from Dr. Jane Goodall, who passed away last week, as you know. She was a noted advocate and anthropologist and just, truly kind of a missing link in our world right now. But this really, I think, sums up to my philosophy when it comes to advice and mentorship because and she really laid it out. So if you don't mind me reading something, you cannot go through a single day without having an impact in the world around you. What you do makes a difference. You have to decide what kind of difference you are going to make. So it's the truth. We all have an impact and we all have to kind of find our niche and what impact we want to make and we will make it. We also have a voice. So with that, I think that the sky is the limit, not to use, that cliche, but it's true. We can do anything. And if you look at what the suffragists did, they made it happen. They decided they wanted women to get the right to vote. And it took 100 years, but it happened. And so I think that is wonderful advice from Dr. Goodall, and we can all take that advice. And it would also be advice that I would give. for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And Dr. Goodall was, amazing role model. And I loved reading about her in some of the classes I took in college. And I just had a question for you. And then my dog started working. So now it's gone right out of my head. So let me get back
Oh, I
to it.
might, yeah, you mentioned dogs. She actually, she did most of her work was with monkeys.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, what is your favorite animal?" And she said, "A dog." And I was shocked when I saw the interview
Yeah.
last week. I said, "Wow." And it's because they're she said monkeys are too much like humans, but
Mm,
dogs have unconditional love and they love you regardless of anything. That they'll greet you, 5 years from now or 5 minutes from now the same because they just have this unconditional love. So, yeah,
yeah. I
I'm a
agree
dog
with her
lover
on
too.
that. And the question did come back to mind when it comes to figuring out like how to use our voice. I know for me, like, being 28, I'm at the beginning of my legal career. It's almost like there's so many options out there and it can be very overwhelming. If you don't mind me asking, this is not planned, but like, what would be your advice to someone like me who's trying to figure out, well, where do I use my voice? Because there's so much happening. So, yeah, I would just love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, and you're not the only one to think about that because a lot of young women, a lot of young individuals are thinking that now too, especially with so much, like you said, so much that's going on in the world. But I would say really follow your passion. I'm very passionate about young women and those who are disadvantaged victims and survivors, for example. So I'm a founding board member of PACE Center for Girls here in Lee County because I've actually worked with that organization for gosh, almost 30 years. And when I first moved over here years ago, we didn't have one and we made it happen against all odds. So I'm very passionate about that. And so find your passion and work to make, like Dr. Goodall say, make that difference every day. It may not happen overnight, but just keep working at it. And if you have no idea at the end of the day, I don't know really what I want to do, Dr. P. Well, talk to somebody, talk to a friend, talk to, your grandma even, she, or your mom to say, and just think about their stories and you might be able to gain some insight and foresight into what you want to do, in the future and where your passion is.
I love that. And it's super helpful. And it's always, I have heard, an exercise, if you will, is like when you're trying to, I guess, figure out where your talents lie, or if it's hard to kind of analyze yourself, going to like a trusted friend and,
Yep.
seeing what they think your skill set is. It's always interesting to hear their answers. But I do have one more question for you before I let you go because I want to be mindful of your time. This is a question I ask at the end of every interview. In a world obsessed with disruption, what do you think should be preserved?
Oh my goodness. We're in an interesting time in our world. I would say, especially in the United States, that we have to hold our US Constitution dear. We have the Bill of Rights within our Constitution. We have a number of rights within the Constitution that we really have to hold dear. I mean, almost when I teach my students, I say, the U.S. Constitution is like our Bible. It's our government Bible, and we have to, we have these rights and responsibilities along with it, including the freedom of speech, including the right to vote. So we can't take those rights lightly. We have to really, hold those to our heart and our mind and hold on to them dearly. So that would be one thing. But I also would say, especially for women in my age group and so forth, is to mentor. Mentorship is so important, especially mentoring young individuals, young women, so that they will have the path forward to know where we've come and where we're going in this path and this journey.
That's amazing advice, and I definitely second the mentorship. I'm lucky enough to work at a firm now where three of our partners are women, and so it's really great to be able to pull them aside. And I know people hate this term, but pick their brain on how they would
Mhm,
handle
mhm,
things, how they
mhm.
balance being a female professional. So this was a really great discussion. Thank you for talking with me today, and I'm excited to read the book. Congrats on that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.